Spiros Milaris is a very talented and very interesting and creative filmmaker. I used Spiros on Alien Autopsy when we did the Investigation Continues, which was a 60-minute documentary based on everything that happened at Roswell. So he was quite involved in most parts of the project. And you know, I know that there's some difficulty at the moment because he's laying claim to coming up with the entire concept of Alien Autopsy and doing everything, but that's absolutely not true. And he was not involved in our trip in America, finding the cameraman, bringing the footage over, and all of that part of it.
All the questions I've been asking for years, hear an answer for all of them. It's like having a jigsaw puzzle with bits missing. And you had a good idea what the jigsaw was, and once you got the missing parts, that was it. Finished. At some point in the 2000s, I was contacted by a gentleman who claimed to have some information about it. So I met him. And he said, I'm a good friend of a sculptor here in the UK. Wouldn't tell me the sculptor's name. However, before he left the meeting, he let slip one of the projects this sculptor was responsible for. And it was a Channel 4 recreation some years prior called Max Headroom, which was quite popular. So we checked out who this gentleman was. And he was indeed a UK sculptor, and he was called John Humphreys.
John Humphreys is one of the best makers in terms of prosthetics. He's a sculptor, he's an artist, he's a creative.
Spiros, then and now, went on to tell me that he'd heard Ray Santilli's story about meeting this fake cameraman and so on. He'd met Ray by chance at a film festival in France, contacted him again when he came back to the UK. Ray Santilli showed Spiros a piece of film. Spiros said, that's never been filmed on celluloid, it's VHS. So Ray told him this fake story about the cameraman and him paying for this footage. So he took off to drive home, did Spiros. And he had this idea. He phoned a friend of his, which was the sculptor, John Humphreys, and told him about this story. And they said, well, why don't we make him one? i.e., why don't we make him an alien autopsy film? So Spiros went back to Ray and said, if you want an alien autopsy film, we can make it for you. Simple as that. Well, I think Ray Santilli's reaction was, the light bulb moment. It was just a question of the financing. And they had a gentleman who could provide that finance. So, the game was afoot. I've been involved in looking at Roswell probably from about 1993. Everybody knows a bit about Roswell, and the reason we're talking about it again is because of the alien autopsy.
Interestingly, internal communications from the CIA have been released where they're actually talking about alien autopsy back then and verifying that they believe that the footage is real and they've seen it themselves.
And it has been called the alien autopsy memo. It is a string of emails between a chap called Eric Davis and Dr. Kit Green. On this 11-page document, they are evaluating a number of things on which they were working on. But primarily, it is the alien autopsy film they're discussing. It's addressed to US billionaire Bob Bigelow, who used to run an organisation called the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS, and he employed a number of scientists to study UFOs. One of those scientists is Dr. Kit Green. Kit Green formerly worked for the CIA. This email list is clarifying statements made by Kit Green concerning the alien autopsy film. It's dated 2001. Without going into too great a detail, he came to the conclusion, as did the others copied in on these emails, that the alien autopsy film, in his opinion, was real, and that he'd seen exactly the same type of film at a briefing at the Pentagon back in 1987/88. And it's caused quite an uproar yet again. When you look at the consensus of UFO researchers around the world when it comes to these documents, and it's like, oh no, not the alien autopsy again. I thought we'd done that. I thought we'd proved it's a fake. Let's move on. Let's forget about it, please. The leaked documents were sent to me by 3 different individuals the day before they were released online. I had no idea this was about to happen, but it just did. It is believed it has come from an archive of a well-known gentleman who had passed away. I'll not mention his name because it's not yet been verified. But it seems plausible enough. He was involved in UFO research. He's an extremely well-known gentleman, if I mention his name.
Terry, Houston, the computer's yours.
Thank you. You troops did a nice job down there.
That was beautiful.
Auto.
We're on the surface.
Okay, we made a good landing.
Roger, enter.
4 minutes later, he was joined by Ed Mitchell.
The whole front is a long one.
There's a number of people who are copied in on this email, and one of those who was copied in, I emailed them and asked them if the documents in question were authentic, and he said, off the record, Philip, yes, they are. The gentleman I contacted on email has refused to answer any more questions, and it would appear to me that both him and his colleagues who are mentioned in this document are embarrassed, because this was an internal set of emails and was never meant for public consumption. The only person so far to speak to Kit Green about this is US researcher Richard Dolan. Richard has interviewed him on the telephone. I think one of the first things he asked him was, is this email list, is it authentic? And he said, yes, it is. Another chap who worked for Robert Bigelow was a chap called Colm Kelleher. And he contacted me and he asked me to speak with Ray Santilli for him. What Colm was seeking at the time was a good quality copy of the alien autopsy film, and of course some celluloid, some 16mm film to analyse. So I did like I'd done many times before, put him in touch with Santilli and left them to it. The main gentleman mentioned in these documents who is commenting on the alien autopsy film is a gentleman called Christopher Kit Green. Everyone knows him as Kit Green. He's an MD, he's a PhD, and still practices medicine even now in the United States. Dr. Green at one point was employed by the CIA, worked on a number of projects for them in a variety of capacities. So he's a highly intelligent gentleman and one that's very well qualified as well. He claims that the briefing he was given in 1988/87 was specifically about the alien autopsy. I think the main reason when you look at these documents is why they would want Kit Green to evaluate the alien autopsy film. There are two reasons. One is that in 1988/87, Kit Green himself says he was taken to the Pentagon and briefed and shown films that looked exactly the same as the alien autopsy film. But also, he's an MD, he's a medical doctor. So later in these documents, Dr. Kit Green, looking at the alien autopsy film itself, nothing to do with any briefing he'd had at the Pentagon, but he gives his own medical opinion on what he sees on that film. And he says, I think it's real. It's a genuine article.
Field of expertise do these people have dealing with anatomies of alien beings? I assure you none. We were learning. That was day one of school when they first cut into the first specimen. One time there was a requirement for our OIC to go to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. So I went ahead and I was selected as the driver to take him to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. After we arrived there, he went to where the officers were meeting for a briefing. The drivers went to another location. There was myself and an airman first class, and we went inside to the balcony area, which had a plexiglass cover over where we could look down to where the officers were.